being Senator Judge Johnny Walls, who I work closely with to develop an outline around prison reform that is called today the Johnny Walls Reentry Program. And so we come today to talk about these issues. We are submitted to you as well our new paradigm shift position paper, which is a position paper that the local organizing committee over 8 years working in the field of research and outreach program along with town hall meetings developed an outline around the issues that were pertaining to us in the community, and it speaks directly toward what we're talking about today. So once again, what is the LOC? The LOC is a local organizing committees that is a conglomerate of organizations, religious institutions, and entrepreneurs and grassroots organizers working together collectively to develop an outline under the banner of love and unity, up under the guidance of what is called the National Agenda, a manual that was developed over 8 years after the Million Man March, coming together through 95 up to 05. I also have been in field work with organizing and mobilizing around a large group of organizations and mobilizations throughout this country, from the Million Man March leading up to the Million More movement, but just recently what we call in the 20th anniversary of that, which was called 1010, and it came from that what was called the Justice of Us Party. So we sit before you today with that. So again, the LOC is a conglomerate organization speaking on behalf of the community, being a liaison between the community and the state and local government, being able to develop outlines to address the issues that's pertaining to us in the community. I come together today with a group of individuals, qualified, committed mothers, fathers, sisters, wives, that's qualified to be able to come today and present to you some of our outlines that we have discovered and we have come together to talk about to you today. And we pray that you are able to lend us your ears to be able to hear what we are here today to talk to you about. And so we have a group of individuals that will be testifying today to you on behalf of that represent various organizations and institutions throughout the state of Mississippi. As I will close and turn it over to the next presenter, I would also say to you is that as I said to you earlier, that I, for over 30 years, has been working within the prison reform ministry. And with that, we present to you, up under the leadership of Minister Farrakhan, a program that we know for the last 50 years has represented the least recidivism program that in this country could ever talk about. And so we are presenting to you as well a program that when we start talking about the reentry program, we have a program that will fit, hopefully, your agenda as well as ours, that will help us in going forward with what we're going to do. Thank you, and I will turn it over to one of my constituents, which is my partner, which is Bishop Cynthia Gardner. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Apostle Dr. Cynthia King Bolden Gardner, known as primarily New Mercy Seat Ministries, and I've worked with the NAACP, etc. I have about 40 years experience in criminal law, both in California, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. I am not licensed here in Mississippi. I'm technically retired, but I come with a severe sense of urgency, because under the Civil Rights Act, the inmates have the right to humane facilities and conditions, the right to be free from sexual crime, the right to be free from racial segregation, the right to express their condition complaints, and the right to assert their rights under the Americans with Disability Act. What I see here in terms of the food situation, the housing situation, the facilities are deplorable. I see violations of both equal protection. I see violation of their right to due process under the law because they are not being heard. I see I see a violation of their right to counsel, because I don't see as a lawyer how the attorneys could have represented them and they now be in the system and not be aware of what is going on and then bring that to the attention of the courts. On another level, the civil rights, there was a case, I think it was SCOTUS, in 1972 that dealt with the conditions of the prisons and mandated that prisons be habitable. Well, I'm at a loss as to why there has not been an order to show cause why the system here should not be held in contempt for failing to comply with that order for habitable conditions. And I think probably the easiest way to describe where we are before I get into the facts of it is that initially when we looked at, and you're going to say, what? Abortion? We thought abortion just dealt with babies and terms. But when you look at abortion now, you see abortion as a continuum. You see it starting out with the whole baby thing, and if that doesn't work, then it moves forward to the school to prison pipeline, and if that doesn't work, then it moves forward to the alternative school system and expulsion and suspension. If that doesn't work, then it moves forward to the juvenile justice system. If that doesn't work, then it moves to certification of juveniles with, and most of the time without appropriate hearings and without appropriate counsel. And then it moves forward from that to incarceration. And then finally, in incarceration, we end up with prison conditions as we have here in the situation of Parchment, and we've been most recently apprised also exists in the system in Greenville. So the concerns are both the food service, their lack of medical treatment,
We have, yeah.
I gave her yours.
Oh, okay.
I gave her yours, yeah. I don't have the first page of yours. I thought I did.
Okay, I can bring some more copies. I know we've given it to the Black Caucus.
Yeah.
That's
All
what
right.
I was just asking.
And so that has caused great consternation on our behalf, because it says essentially that they're human until they get into the system. And that's far from the truth, because under the law 2123 and otherwise, we are looking at punitive, but we're also looking at rehabilitative. And if they are not in a position where they can maintain their health, where they can maintain their hygiene, where they can receive appropriate food, where they can receive appropriate medical attention, all of those things coming together, they'll never be able. They'll get the punitive end, yes, but they'll never get the rehabilitative end of it, which is part of 2123, part of both their initial plan under 90 days when they first get in, and then part of their completed plan, their discharge plan, that is to be constructed within 30 days of their release. So that whole thing becomes a quagmire, because it's not even possible for that to take place. Now, I've also, one of the main things that we're looking at is that we're concerned about depopulating the prison. I mean, the fact that the prison needs to be reconstructed, in fact, Parchment needs to be demolished, I believe is without question. But in addition to that, the prison system needs to be restructured so that it's depopulated, particularly in areas dealing with non-violent offenses. If juveniles are certified to adult court on the basis that they're 18, although the offense occurred before they were 18, that's against the law. If juveniles are certified to adult court without having an appropriate hearing and without appropriate counsel, that's a violation of the law. Most of the offenses that we're looking at right now in terms of nonviolent offenses are drug-related offenses, criminal mischief type things, and all of those could be released into the community. There should be what is called an accelerated rehabilitative disposition program, so that for first-time offenders and minor offenders, it's called ARD, they would be able to go into a program like this and be rehabilitated within the community without us having to pay as taxpayers for prisons that are unfit for human habitation. The next thing is that we have elderly adults, as indicated in Ms. Rakia's Prison Reform Now format. We have adults that are 60 and over that have done more than, I think under 2123, it requires at least 50% of their time for violent offenses and 25% of their time for non-violent offenses. And I think under her statistics, there's over 60, no, those are juveniles. I'll go forward. 3,500 incarcerated that are 50 or older that make up 18.7% of the state prison population. So they could be released. In addition, there are 66,000 Mississippians behind bars or under criminal justice supervision, but if we take a look at it, a lot of that's drugs. And that's not to say, okay, we have a society that accepts drugs now. No. But when you look at the majority of the United States either has medical use of marijuana, recreational use of marijuana, or some form of limited liability for for marijuana usage. It doesn't make sense to have our prisons populated with people who are in for possession for personal use, possession of a quantity that one presumes is for sale and distribution, when a pound of marijuana, yeah, maybe, but an ounce of marijuana, 9 out of 10 is for personal use and use with friends. And so they get incarcerated instead for use for sale, which carries a much higher incarceration period and takes up much more space in the jails and therefore much more taxpayer money. It just doesn't make sense. In addition to that, we have the whole gang thing. Every time somebody's involved and they get into the system now, it's, oh, and they're black or they're Latino, it's they're involved in a gang. Not necessarily so. But we have this initiative, what is it, 2459? Coming through that is going to label them as gang members when there's a group of them, when they are of color or flying colors. But these kids could be out playing basketball, coming from a basketball game, all in their little neighborhood colors, and be labeled a gang. I know my nephews had a rap group, and they were labeled a gang because of their colors. But they were rappers, lousy ones if I must say, but rappers, okay? And they were labeled that way and almost found their way into the system as a result of that. That is an innate waste of taxpayer money and a waste of their lives. Let me not get off into that taxpayer thing. It's a waste of their lives. There's so much more that can be done with them. There's community service. There's other ways of rehabilitating them other than incarcerating them, so that once they get incarcerated, they can learn worse crimes than they knew before they went in. And further, learn how to execute on those crimes. So that's a problem. So if we were to release the elderly, release those that are incarcerated for possession, possession for sale, possession with intent to deliver, when we know that those quantities were not really sufficient for that, we would probably reduce, and I'm guesstimating, the prison population by at least 25%. Then you have those that are labeled as, when we stop them, we talk them, we ask for identification, they resisted arrest. They ran, they fled. they pulled away from us. One tried to get my gun, one tried to get my taser. I had the pepper spray and I had the this, I had the that. And you know, the kids' faces all blown up and beat up, and you know that it didn't quite go down like that. Like the young man that was found drowned to death in a 2-inch puddle of water somewhere near Louisville or Mayville or somewhere above Carthage. It just didn't happen that way. So that when we're looking at these types of situations, these individuals can be released without any threat of harm to the community, without any threat to any so-called victim, because really the victims were themselves because they were using the drugs. And their friends were using the drugs. And so they have to be, and a lot of them are self-medicating, so they have to be re-educated and retrained and given alternative options. And if there are no jobs out there, there are no alternative options. If you're going to be out there and you're going to, you know, these young ones are out there and they have children, they have families. But let me back up. 2459. Long-term ramifications of that drug, of that gang thing is going to be, if you have this child in your house and this child has been labeled a gang member, this child can no longer come home because mama will lose public housing. This child can no longer come home because they can't interact with someone who's been labeled a felon or habitual offender. This child can no longer come home because mama not only will lose public housing, but she'll lose TANF and SNAP and probably lose her job. And I know at least in Carthage, in that Lincoln Estates, people are renting with the option to buy or leasing with the option to buy. But after 4 or 5 years, a child comes home from incarceration, the parents are kicked out. So that's patently unfair. So we need that. We need to look into hiring more social workers, and this is from you, Rakia, doctors and counselors for the jail. We need to investigate and remove. We thought they were the actual guards, but we found through inside intelligence that they are the chiefs of security and not the actual guards. These are long-term individuals who have been in administration in the prison facilities for 10 years or greater, some 15 years. These aren't the actual guards that are abusing these inmates. We've asked again for the closure of Parchment for Good and to create a community oversight board so that we're involved in decision making with regard to the prison. And it's not that far-fetched when you consider under 2123, it says that you can have people from the community as long as they have a diploma. And as long as they are, I think it said, at least 21 or 25 years of age with, was it 4 or 5 years of employment? So if they can be a part of the prison parole board, then surely we can establish a community board that can get involved in oversight of the prisons and involvement and input in the prisons of like character, without there being any violation of anyone else's sense of right and wrong as to how the prisons ought to be operated and who ought to be involved in it. Citizens ought to be involved. The next level is to this whole 3rd grade alternative classes, ADHD labeling. I know that's the school system, but it also becomes the prison pipeline. Because once these kids are labeled, by the 3rd grade, if they don't pass those standardized tests, preparation is made at that point in time for future incarceration, because they know that there is no other alternative for them except to turn the crime if they're not killed beforehand. Let's see what else. And there was one other thing that I wanted before. Oh, and this was not part of our group discussion. This is me. When I was in California, we had a public defender office. 250 lawyers, some of the most qualified lawyers in the world, from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Georgetown, people who devoted their lives. We wanted to do that. We didn't have to do that. And we had 5 different offices, and we effectively represented defendants, and we were paid by the government. I've been to the courthouse in Carthage. I've been to several other courthouses, and I'm telling you, and I'm sure you have too. I don't know if it has been on the criminal side, but it raises a hair on my neck when I see a judge call a defendant to the podium, to the bench. The judge calls him there, talks to him without the benefit of counsel, makes decisions, asks questions of fact about the case without the benefit of counsel, and then when it's over, said, and done with, does like this and calls an attorney over, and the attorney comes over and says, you represent him. Well, for what? Everything's already out there. And even in bail hearings, when you go for a bail hearing, I've gone for some of the church parishioners, and I've said, Your Honor, I'm here, is there anybody here on behalf of so-and-so? And I raise my hand. I'd stand up and I'd say who I was. Do you practice law in this jurisdiction? No, and excuse me, Your Honor, I don't think I have to speak to whether this person is a danger or a flight risk, or whether this person is going to be beneficial to the community. Well, then you can sit down if you don't have a license. Those are the kinds of things that I have witnessed in the system, and it's most unfortunate. So in addition to the release things, the juvenile offenses and all of that, I would ask your committee to seriously look into funding an actual public defender system. It's been stigmatized. You might want to call it criminal defense system or office or something, but something needs to be done in these small communities. That's why places like Parch run school. I turn it over to Kia.
Representative Clark has a question.
Thank
Yes,
you so
ma'am.
very much. I do appreciate. My name's Alice Clark.
Okay.
I appreciate all of the things that you've done and you said. But I wanted to know, it appears that you might have access to some of those good lawyers, and since we say we don't have any money,
Yes, ma'am.
do you think you might be able to get some of them to do some volunteer work for us until we can get some money?
My issue, they may be able to. I'm not licensed in Mississippi.
But I think if you're friends with them, I'm thinking that you might be able to get some of them.
The Magnolia State Bar let me know in no uncertain terms that because I wasn't licensed, that I would either have to take the bar or submit my application. They'd have to put it under consideration when I first moved here. And I was willing to volunteer. And that's what I had been doing in Carthage. I'd been, kind of going around, kind of helping, stopping by this judge's chambers and catching this judge in the hallway and saying, hey, you might not wanna, or can I talk to you for a minute? Or can we handle this way or that way? And all the doors were slammed, and therefore I've just shut down, moved out of there, and I stay in my home unless I'm traveling for ministry.
And I would like to as well, then I'm going to turn it over to Rick. And thank you, Ms. Allison. How you doing? We have, the local organizing committee has been working closely, particularly with the Simmons, Senator Simmons and his brother, Mayor Simmons out of Greenville, working with legal counsels in dealing with one, particularly dealing with his reentry program and expungement program. And so with those programs, we have been working with legal attorneys such as Judge Rubu Hill, young attorneys that's coming, one that just came back from Harvard, but he's from Mississippi. that was working with us, as well as a committee out of, I think, the University of Mississippi, a law firm down there. So we have a team that's willing to work in different capacities to assist you in the areas that you may need to work on. We just need to see how that looks and put that and frame it a little bit more, but definitely we would.
Thank you very much.
You had mentioned, community oversight boards.
Yes.
Okay, who would appoint these boards?
That I think should come, it shouldn't be local politicians. It should come from the community. Or either it would come from,
The new
maybe
paradigm.
the supervisor's office or the mayor's office of the community in conjunction with some of the more active citizens. I'm sorry, you have no.
No, that's great. You know, so ideally, I think it should be a process by which community members are able to apply for that position.
Yes.
Based on a set of criteria, including have you had a loved one that's incarcerated, you know, length of time, their engagement, have you yourself been incarcerated at some point or another. The goal is to have people who have had experience with the justice system actually be able to serve on that oversight board, as well as stakeholders, you know, attorneys, that includes people who have had intimate relationship with the prison system, because we know when the lights are off or when we're not there or on a site visit, that things shift and change. And so even, you know, the idea could even be from a former guard who has had that employment experience. So.
And I think that the new paradigm shift position paper that we submitted to everyone, it speaks to that as well. I hope you have a copy of that. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's, it was sent to Ms.
No,
Lowry.
it's your time to present.
Oh, okay.
It was sent to Ms. Lowry for all of you. I'm sorry.
And now we'll let Sister Rakia.
Well, I really appreciate the time and being here, and I really appreciate the Greenville local organizing committee for inviting me here to participate, for joining with us on the coalition, the Mississippi Prison Reform Coalition. So I just want to say thanks to y'all. And I don't have much to add. I think the only thing that I would say is I would emphasize the need to, one, immediately remove people from parchment.
Yes.
The conditions are still worsening, and every day I get a call, or members of our coalition get a call about someone's need based on health. Like, these are medical conditions that we're talking about. From people, you know, and I'm sure you've heard the stories, but when you have a mother consistently calling about their loved one not getting the medical treatment that they need inside of parchment, it's really hard. It's really hard, right? You know. So, you know, so I don't have to keep talking about that. The other piece, though, is that I want to mention. I'll mention two other things. One is that there's a serious addiction problem inside of the prisons, all of them. And with the support of legislators, I know judges would love to see the ability to release some of those folks into rehabilitation programs and not have them sitting there in prison, right? There are countless incidents where family members, their whole groups created, where family members gather to talk about their loved one's addiction inside of prison and the amount of money that it's costing them just to keep them safe or to prevent, you know, harm to them, but also how they're caught up in their loved one's own use, right? Because the loved one is saying they need protection and they don't know if they're using the money to buy more drugs, right? So there's a problem that's bigger than simply drugs being sold in prison. It's the fact that we're sending people away to places when they actually just have an addiction problem and they're not being helped there. So I think we can really address that by looking at some of the laws around, you know, rehabilitation and the release of people. And it's not something that we haven't done. I know people, there are people who work with us who are released from prison into a rehabilitation program instead of serving out the rest of their term. So I'm more than happy to talk more about that at a later date. And then the last thing I really want to stress is this gang bill, 2459. And I know that you all know that it presents significant it can present significant problems for our communities in the future. Many people have said it is tantamount to a Mississippi stop and frisk. As a person who lived in New York for 10 years during stop and frisk, who represented children who were charged with felonies that came as a result of stop and frisk policies, where 5 million people were literally impacted by stop and frisk, 5 million people arrested by stop and frisk, 249,000 of those people, young people, between the ages of 14 and 26. I saw through our programs alone, right, where I was working, 4,200 young people came through our programs just during the time I was there. 4,200 young people, and we prevented their incarceration because we were there to advocate for them, doing a lot of what the work my comrade here has talked about going into the courts and asking for compassionate release as opposed to sending them to Rikers Island or to a juvenile facility. So I just want to talk about the danger, because it not only is a danger to our judicial system, because it did cost New York City a whole lot of money, increased taxpayers' dollars towards the court system, but the emotional impact that it had on young people, on families, it lasts forever. And so I know, for example, I always tell the story of one young person that I know who was stopped 4 times every day on their way to school by police officers. When they walked out of their house, when they got a block away, they were stopped by a police officer and asked for their ID. When they got closer off the train to go into the school, they were stopped again. By the time they got to the school door, they were stopped again before they went into the school, right? And then when they got into the school, they were searched by a police officer, right? Because you don't know what detectives. Imagine what that does to your psyche, about your body, and your ability and capacity to be human. And so, you know, it creates an understanding that you do not have a sense of privacy, you do not have a sense of ownership to your own self, and that you can be violated at any point in time, right? Either physically or just period emotionally. There are instances where we did an exhibit around stop and frisk where we saw that in one instance, 126 times was one person's experience of being stopped and frisked. 126 times. What I'm talking about is not a unique situation, but it was the norm. And it created a culture shift in New York, where stop and frisk was part of what policing was. And so even when stop and frisk has been eliminated, it is still the culture for police officers to stop people because they're suspecting young people of causing harm or doing harm, mainly black and brown children. So I want us to be very careful of adopting a bill which pretty much does the same thing, and let me tell you how it does the same thing. SB 2459 enhances penalties for all felony offenses, including nonviolent offenses. It provides that criminal gang activity results in a 3 to 15 years in prison, in addition to the prison sentence for the underlying felony offense. It prohibits eligibility for parole and earned time for convictions handed down under the statute. Designates criminal gang activity as a violent crime even when the underlying offense is a non-violent crime. It lessens the standard approved by allowing convictions for criminal gang activity to be based on the preponderance of the evidence, which is a very low standard in terms of the court. In general, the legislation will increase the state's prison population and corrections budget without delivering any public safety benefits. At a time when we really should be concerned and focused on the urgent need to reduce the number of people in this state's dangerously crowded prisons. You all know the problems in the prisons. I offer all of this around this because it is critical. It is critical. And I don't want us to just stand by side as this is passed, because we will look back and we will be concerned about our children and our grandchildren and their children and what we produce. We look back at the crime bill and we recognize what a huge mistake that was and how many families were separated and torn apart, which put us in a place right now where we have loved ones that are literally living without family members because they've been incarcerated for the majority of their lives, and how that has impacted our communities is significant, economically, but also emotionally. So I just want us to be careful. I want us to really understand all the risks. And thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
what she was saying, the mental health aspect. Not only are those that are highly addicted in the prisons, there are a lot of mentally ill individuals in the prison system. So not only should the others be reverted to rehabs, but those that are mentally ill need to be in mental institutions and hospitals because they're being victimized daily.
Do you have any numbers on how many of the, addicted and how many are in?
I can get you numbers. I don't have numbers with me today, but I can easily get you numbers. I can actually see your package around something. And you have it with you. Okay, I just want to make sure that.
Well,
Then you need to paradise.
Did you say you gave that to Senator Simmons and Mayor Simmons?
No, we gave packet of solutions, policy solutions to the chair of Black Caucus, House Black Caucus. No, the House. Yeah, Robert Johnson. And so I can give you the same packet. I can send that. I can email it or I can. Okay. All right.
You gave it to
I
Ron
just-
Johnson, the volunteer, never picked it up.
This was back in January. I think they put it here. Yeah.
Angela is AEGELA at the Yes, ma'am.
While we're looking at that, I don't know if you'll know it or not, but a couple of years ago, I did a bill where we were supposed to make sure that all of the police officers knew how to treat people who had mental problems, and they were supposed to be, anybody remember that?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure.
And I guess we need to try to make sure that everybody is adhering to that, because if they were adhering to it, we wouldn't have all
they
those
would
mental
be,
people incarcerated.
and I submitted an initiative to Ms. Trons, an initiative against violence against the mentally ill, against minorities, and against the indigent. And it has a segment in there, dealing with that very issue as well.
Representative Clark, what is that bill name and number?
Just because I told you to get great hands. I don't remember the numbers I got out there.
Okay.
My auntie, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Maachi Prem, and I am a member of the LOC. I'm co-chair here in Jackson, and I've worked on a number of cases for the last 13 years that I've been a resident here of Mississippi, and 40 years before that in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Chicago, Illinois. And when I came here and found out that Parchment was still open, it was like walking into a history book. To find out that Parchment is a plantation and Raymond is a plantation, and that they are allowed to exist in what is called these United States of America, I was absolutely appalled. The culture of this country that would allow citizens to be reverted to enslavement and captivity, forced to work and for close to nothing until death, is what's happened far too often in Parchment. Raymond, the same. Raymond is what's called a gladiator school, where prisoners are forced to fight each other for the entertainment of the guards and other prisoners. And this is what's happening right behind our backs. But it's something that we need to turn around and pay great attention to. I've worked on cases where people were not charged with any offense, but were arrested and forced to sit in jail until someone protested for them. There was a young lady, Tina Funderburg, who was held for 8 years without a charge right here on Pascagoula Street at the jail, Hinds County Jail. Without charge, without having a lawyer, without having a court date. And it was only through protests that she was eventually released. So I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at the cotton fields and the tomato fields of parchment where our people are out planting and picking the produce, and whatever surplus is left over is sold on the side of the road, and it isn't for their benefit. And really it isn't for the benefit of society that we would put people back in the system of enslavement and captivity. So this is something that needs to be recognized and rectified if we are to call ourselves fair-minded, if we are to say that we believe in justice, because this isn't justice. You know, we're not seeing due process. We know that there's an exception to the 13th Amendment, but yet still that it's torture is what we're dealing with. Torture, rape of prisoners, torture, physical torture of prisoners, rotten food, rotten situations, raw sewage in the prisons, mold, assaults, high disrespect and ignoring of humanity of prisoners. Parchment must be shut down. We can't even ask for it to be shut down, it simply must be shut down.
Can I ask you this question? So you're talking about parchment in its entirety.
Parchment in its entirety.
So where are these people are to go?
Well, as Sister Rukia and Sister Bishop have talked about, there's certain prisoners who should not even be incarcerated. There should be other programs for them. Then for those who are incarcerated, then they need to be incarcerated in other facilities that are supervised by committees, citizens committees.
I'd just like to add, if you don't mind,
Certainly.
so the solution is actually not as complicated as we think. The response, yes, it's going to take planning, but we have a lot of people who are interested in seeing this through, including a lot of investors who are interested in assisting in creating a communal response to helping folks who need transitional housing, helping the state develop what is necessary. We have people who have shut down prisons in other states who are investors who are willing to assist in that. So I think that we have resources. The other thing is, and have done it in right ways, have right-sized or downsized, because I don't think it's a right size. I have my own perception of what rehabilitation should be. But they have downsized the prisons and created smaller institutions, which allows for greater opportunity for rehabilitation and decreases the amount of people that we're sending behind prison bars in the first place. And every single time we've seen it everywhere, crime has decreased in all of these places instead of increased. So one is transitional housing, right? The second is an opportunity to, so 6,000 people we know, based on the solutions that we provided, 6,000 people could be released from Mississippi Department of Corrections. If we went on that high number of 6,000, right? We know that 1,000 of those, a little more than 1,000 based on Steve Pickett's latest report around the number of people who've already been granted parole, but are still sitting behind prison bars right now because they haven't been able to meet the residency requirement, right? So that's 1,000 out of the 6,000, right? We know that there's another large percent, I think something like 500 or 600. I don't want to lie to you about the numbers, but there are hundreds of elderly people or seniors or aging people, I think that's a better term, right? Aging people behind prison bars who actually could be released now as well. Aging people that's another population. If we decrease, my bottom line is that there's 86 juveniles who are, there are 86 people who were charged as juveniles with life without the possibility of parole who are still behind prison bars after the Supreme Court has already said it's time to let them go. The Supreme Court of the United States said that Mississippi should be releasing those folks, and we still haven't. So I mean, we have the numbers, and so I think if we decrease, we won't have as big of a problem finding another place for them to be. If one, we decrease or decarcerate, and then two, we invest in community-based and community-led transitional homes, also reentry programs, and sustainable institutions or cooperatives for people coming home. And we would be happy to share those contacts with you.
I was going to ask you, do you have a list of some of those states that have successfully done that?
Pennsylvania's one.
And we would definitely get you that research for sure.
New York is New York. Yeah, but I can get you that. Yeah, I'll do that.
Pennsylvania's program is ARD, Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition. Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition, ARD.
And then you're cool, then I'll turn it over to Brother Charles. Well,
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, we're going to have to stop now with the work session.
2 minutes? Okay.
Yeah,
I
2
would
minutes.
love to give Brother Charles,
yes.
just because his story is since 1992.
Right.
And I know it's one that most of you all know.
We'll have to get that email today.
Okay.
That will come tomorrow.
Okay, so I'm gonna send you right now, while we're here.
Brother Charles.
Yes, first of all, thank each one of you for attending this meeting. I know that, okay. All right.
We thank you again.
Thank you, and it's good seeing you.
Madam Chair, thank you for giving us 2 minutes. Well, I'm not going to try to
Please read that.
condense, I'm not going to try to condense what I have to say in 2 minutes. I'm just going to say thank you for allowing us to express our position as a member of the LOC. And I was going to speak on behalf of the victims, the family, because I am one of those. And 28 years from this period, my son was stopped, and within 19 hours he was hung. With his, he was hung with his own shoelaces, and from that point on, I have received calls consistently from that point on for the last 28 years from other family members, not just here. Okay.
Definitely, if you can, Brother Charles, read that peacefully, and that we can put it. Yeah, we do.
So I can't express what I would like to express in 2 minutes. I did make a copy of what has been given on a national level as it relates to prison reform. And I'm going to leave this with you to look over it, to consider some of the suggestions that were made by Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam in this particular book called The National Agenda that discusses justice issues as well as prison reform issues. I just want to again thank you and hope that we can reschedule and maybe come back to add more because it's much more that you and the body needs to hear. One thing I would like to add in terms of on record is that when you get an opportunity to share a briefing with the judiciary committees and the elected officials, is that the issue that we are faced with in terms of the prisons, this is nothing new. These issues been here for many, many years, and I'm a witness to that. And I just want to challenge each representative from the various areas to take this issue much more seriously than they have, because it's affecting more people than the people that are the direct victims. It extends throughout their whole family line and their whole community. So I'm in concert with everyone that is here, and I have committed my life to work throughout the community to keep this issue alive, and we hope that we can continue to have a relationship with the Black elected officials so we can bring them in touch with what is happening on the ground. So again, thank you for all of those who are here. Thank you, Brother Kareem, and Sister Mahadi, and Attorney Rakia, and Bishop, and everybody that's here. Thank you for coming out.
Read that piece of much, please.
I don't know if she has time.
Yes.
To read it.
But y'all,
You can go into your, you can tell me your story.
did you read what y'all?
I'm just gonna text up and just let them know. I just need them to text me if I need to run up and vote on something.
Okay, we're gonna let you go in a second, but we want you to get ready after vote.
If we just never know if we're gonna have anything.
Right.
Hold on,
You don't want nobody trying to
hold on
vote.
1 second. Okay. Now, Mr. Chuck, tell me your last name.
Charles Muhammad. Muhammad, yes. My son was stopped on August the 22nd of 1992, and within 19 hours he was found hung in the Simpson County Jail.
His name.
His name was Andre Jones. At the time, my wife was president of the local branch here of the NAACP, and I was the state coordinator for the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He was arrested in Brandon, Mississippi, and transported to Simpson County. We eventually, with the help of attorney Chukwe Lumumba and his staff, we found out that my son was taken out of that jail, and he was actually strangled and then brought back in a wheelchair and was hung up with his shoelaces. And of course they said that he hung himself, but we had an opportunity to talk to some of the inmates as well as some of the family members of the inmate to get more detail on what actually happened.
You said he was taken out of jail.
Yes. The Simpson County Jail.
Is that where he was found, at the Simpson County jail?
No, he was taken out and he was brought back in, and he was hung up in a shower stall in the jail
So it's yes to
with his
answer the
own
question.
shoelaces. And everything that has been experienced over the last few months in reference to reaching out beyond the state of Mississippi, we made an effort to get justice informed by some of the inmates who were there. But they were, of course, too afraid to come forth publicly because of the fear that surrounded that environment in that jail.
What would have been the motive to do something like
They don't need a motive. If you know the history of that jail in that county, that was not the first time that someone had been hung in that particular jail. We found out doing the research, a investigative reporter from the Atlanta Constitution came to Jackson and discovered through the Bureau of Statistics that within a 5-year period, over 48 others had been hung in jails in Mississippi.
What period?
Over a 5-year period, that over 48 others had been hung in jails here in the state of Mississippi. So they had created a method and a means by which they were hanging inmates in the jail that was covering it up. But that was not known until the death of my son. So many of the present elected officials at this time, I don't know if they even was aware of those statistics that has existed for many years. So this is nothing new. The conditions of the jails was known at that time because our case, we went all the way up to Washington, D.C., and we appealed to President Bush at that time and the Attorney General, John Dunn. And at the end of his tenure as president, we continued with President Bill Clinton and Janet Reno. And Janet Reno ordered the federal government to come and to review the jails. And every jail that was reviewed was not in compliance. And that was, at that time, over 18 jails. So that's 28 years from today that the jails have been in the condition that they're in. The reason why I'm here is because I am a member of the LOC, but I'm here as well as to represent the families that have been affected by the recent murders that has occurred in the jails and is still happening today. Because they don't have an opportunity to come before a legislative body and express their pain that they are experiencing, as I have experienced, me and my wife and my daughter, for the last 28 years. So I'm here to represent them as well as to say to the members of the LOC and those who are with us that this is something that we can never drop, because we don't want to come back another 28 years from today and have to deal with the same issue. I thank Brother Kareem and Attorney Kia and all of those who are here today, but none of you hear the pain that I have heard over the 28 years as a parent. When that happened to our son, Andre, I received calls from Detroit, Michigan, all the way to Los Angeles, California, daily. And I still receive those calls because of the history that those who discover what happened to my son, Andre, it doesn't stop. So I thank you.
I would like for you to read that one piece, Brother Charles, please.
Yes.
Do you have it?
Yes, I do, sir.
Okay, please.
This is from the national agenda, and I thought that it would be good that we could leave this with you and you can share it. Since we live in a world that is contrary to that which is of God, a world of injustice and a world of unrighteousness, the consequence of that is the behavior of human beings that causes the human to act as a savage. A savage is a human being that has lost the knowledge of self and is living the life of a beast. When we have a society filled with persons that prey on one another, then we have a society of people that are living on an animalistic plane of existence. And therefore prisons are built to house those who offend the laws of men who have already offended the laws of God. These prisons have proved that they do not have the will, the desire, or knowledge of how to reform the inmates. As a result, there is a very high rate of recidivism. True prison reform can only come by giving the human being those human rights that were deprived by society and by the ignorance of parents and the family. When white supremacy rules of the society and the society becomes fearful of the population growth of the Black American and the Latino American, then society increases the means by which antisocial behavior will become more prevalent, and therefore the building of prisons is the biggest growth industry in America. People do not build hotels because they do not expect occupancy. Businessmen invest in prisons that they do not intend to fill. True prison reform starts with the enlightenment of the inmate of who that inmate is in reality and not what he or she has become because of circumstances. True prison reform reconnects the soul to its creator and begins to provide those human needs, and then we see a change in attitude in the inmate that leads to behavior change. The disproportionate incarceration of Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, and others in the United States is a crisis of mammoth proportions that we must address. In many places, up to 50% of persons from our communities are on probation, parole, or in jail. Our failure to address this crisis will greatly diminish our family power and voting power. Too often we allow our incarcerated sisters and brothers to be forgotten and disconnected from the community. As we work to raise the cultural and political consciousness of our families in public housing, in ghettos, and in the suburbs and upscale areas, we must also work to raise the cultural and political consciousness of our family members in the jail cells and chain gangs, and in the solitary wings and death rows. It is the responsibility of those of us on the outside to provide the imprisoned with information, support, and encouragement, both while they are behind bars and as they re-enter society. Federal, state, and local governments consign many of us to a life of prison numbers, overcrowded cells, parole hearings, and disenfranchisement by planning to imprison us rather than planning to educate us. Many of our sisters and brothers have their dreams and aspirations killed by a society which enacts and legitimizes racially discriminatory laws and encourage and justifies the disproportionate high brutalization, harassment, and scrutinizing of our communities by police. To the contrary, we must work to provide all people with a life of academic opportunity, spiritual growth, family development, and community support. We must win the hearts and minds of our people and inspire them to dream and produce an environment which nurtures their dreams and transforms them into reality. When others have given up on our people, we must invest in our people. When others push our people to despair, we must push them to hope. When others declare that our people are irredeemable, we must believe that they are redeemable and convince them of that as well. So the goals are to provide incarcerated persons with an avenue for community participation and support, to raise the cultural and political consciousness of the incarcerated, to prevent incarcerated inmates from being abused or lost in the system as a result of their own actions or as a result of government neglect or misconduct. To this end, the Prison Outreach Initiative seeks to match incarcerated persons with people on the outside who will, 1, visit the incarcerated sister or brother regularly, 2, send correspondence to the incarcerated sister or brother regularly, 3, provide the incarcerated sister or brother with reading materials, 4, raise small amounts of money for the incarcerated sisters or brothers' canteen account, 5, monitor the general treatment and parole status of those incarcerated from our communities, 6, help persons returning from prison, 7, establish community-based halfway houses and other alternatives to institutionalization, and 8, funds to evaluate faith house programs. These are some of the goals that was determined by those who formed and developed the national agenda in reference to the prison reform. So we would like to leave this copy with you to consider, and again, thank you again. I appreciate you and hope that you pass this on to the rest of the
And so again, thank you, Brother Charles, for that, and I'm glad that that was allowed to be put into the records. As we close, and again, we have thanked you a lot, but as we close, what we're summarizing up is that what we're looking at is really behind those walls of victims. We know that since 1947, that the change in mindset of young black men changed from that point. Coming into the 1960s of the Kennedy administration, the whole concept of juvenile delinquency changed. It changed from looking at the discrimination and the disenfranchisement of young black men and the cause effect of what that came about into turning into causing them to be the causation of their condition. And because of that, up under the Patrick Moynihan report that he put out in 1964, which was called the 3/5 of a nation, that talked about addressing those issues. And when they looked at that report and identified that those young black men in the future will be considered what they call time bombs, they began to develop a form of action of how to contain them and control them. And we went from that into the crime bill, into the mass incarceration to where we are at today. And so we're here today to ask you to work with us, work with the grassroots organization, to bring about a change, to help change this criminal system from tormenting and terrorizing our family into changing and rehabilitating our community from a spiritual and moral perspective. Thank you.
You'll receive, if I may, in your email, an email from Bald Eagle. That's me. And I sent you the ARD program. And I'll send the initiative to you for Senator Clark, if that's okay. Sure. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Before I forget, there was one issue that I did want to include in this, is that we need to look at the state medical examiner and that position, because in the case of our son, Stephen Haynes, who were presently the state examiner, he ruled the death of our son as being suicide. And later it was discovered that Dr. Haynes had performed over 1,000 autopsies, I think, that was out of compliance during his tenure. But these are the areas that many times we do not investigate to determine the credibility of those people who makes these kinds of decisions. And we had to go outside of the state of Mississippi and get a private forensic pathologist to give us a true assessment of the cause of death. But these are areas, I'm sorry. The private pathologist, of course, agreed that our son was murdered. He actually removed the larynx. I was in the autopsy performance. I saw the bruises of my son that was on his body, of course, and the examination of the ligature mark around his neck showed where he was actually strangled. If he had not been strangled, and if he had hung himself, it wouldn't have been the circular around his neck, wouldn't have been completely around. It would have caused an indiction in his head. Now, I was there in the examining room, and I saw all of this with myself. So the point is that from a oversight committee, these are the areas that has to be looked at, because of the recent hangings that has occurred in the jails, and these are the kinds of things that many of course, the family members may not be privy to understand how to challenge. And of course, we know that many of them don't have the resources to challenge these cases that they are faced with in their loved ones. Yeah.
I apologize.
It's okay.
I represent the Southern Rural Black Women Initiative for Human and Social Rights. Following up on your testimony, there is an ongoing event of prisons dying. Ongoing. It seems like it's averaging anywhere from 2 to 3 prisoners per week.
25 too.
25 people have died in prison since December 31st.
And I'm saying in averaging what's that's maybe 3-4 prisoners per week. My question is, and the report is that there appears to be no foul play. That's the report that you get. My question is, who's doing the investigation? Are all of these cases being investigated? And if so, who is doing the investigation? Are they independent of the prison system? Because, like you said, families don't have the resources to look into all of this, but that should be something that we should be looking into anyway. I mean, that's an alarming number of people dying, and I was just recently told this has not just started happening. they're announcing who's dying now because of the attention that has been brought to the ongoing tragedy that's happening at the prison system. So we need to have a system in place so we know that these prisoners are not dying from assault, from murders, from sexual, from whatever. Yeah, I know that some people, some of the prisoners are sick and can get sick because of the conditions that they're living in. It can cause you to be sick. Anybody could get sick and die from that stuff. But then, do we know that all of these prisoners are dying from natural causes? No, I don't think so. So that needs to be investigated, but we need to know who's actually doing the investigation and if they are independent of the prison system and what is their connection and
Is it credible?
absolutely.
In our discussions, we discussed that normally it would go outside to a federal autopsy or federal bureau to begin to investigate and actually assist in or actually conduct the autopsy. Or another,
Every death or because of this situation?
because of this, when you have situations like this, or either outside jurisdiction with the supervision on a federal level, but to have the state looking after the state, I mean, that's collusion.
Absolutely.
That's a recipe for collusion.
You know, there was a video of Haynes where he was taking the impressions that he had took of a suspect of murder a child, and he took the mold of those teeth and bit the cadaver of the child, body of the child, and that was used as part of the proof to convict two men of killing a child, and they were later on exonerated. However, they spent many years in prison before they received their exoneration.
Let me say this, how many groups are represented?
And that's probably what you need to get a list of laws.
Can you all just get around this?
Okay.
I'll just start with, if you can write it down. Or even someone can email the list to me.
Okay, yeah, and
But we're the same group that was here with Ms. Lowry before. I mean, you're an assistant, you're clerk,
She just came in before the proceedings began.
yeah.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I also emailed you the solutions documents, and hopefully we'll have a list for you of all the states that have decreased their prison population and or closed prisons, by the end of the day or early morning.
Thank you. What I want to recommend is if there are some questions that you all want us to try to get answered, that's
Okay.
Say that again.
If there are a list of questions or issues you all want us to try to get answers to, we can look at it and try to come up with a way
To get back to.
to
Right,
advance
yeah,
that.
that's right, we definitely do.
Yes, sir.
I have one question that the correction officer they have at these prison facilities is not properly trained. They're going out there on the street and getting John Doe off and making them a correction officer. From my experience of correction with the military, they are not properly trained. They should have some kind of training for how to treat people. That's something they're lacking. I have friends in California that is correction officer, and you supposed to go through like 11-week training to be a correction officer, and I don't see that happening in Mississippi.
Do we know what kind of training they're getting?
It's almost like it's like military training.
Well, I know that, well, again, I'm hoping that you have, that we submitted to you a new paradigm shift position paper that again, the LOC has compiled and developed over an 8-year period. And it has some of our strong advocates and names on that, such as Chuckway Lamumba, and one with Dorothy Silver, as well as Dr. Hollis and others that work with us to compile this. In that, one of the recommendations that we're talking about is training for policemen and correctional officers. And we have a team, as well as a book manual that we've done, policing your community that was done by one of our research scholars. And so we have a format that we are trying to present, and we're using Greenville as a model as to they are allowing us to try out some of these projects that we are talking about.
Now, does this list already exist that I'm asking, that I'm referring to, that has maybe your questions, Ms. Brooks, and some of the other questions and issues that you all think are important? Have you all assembled this already?
Yes, ma'am, and then what we're gonna do now when we leave you, we're gonna get together again and compile it to a precise, and then we'll submit that to you.
Okay, I think that would be very good.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to say, I'd like for you to ask
Bring them up to the mic.
what I want to get information. I want to know how many of our black state legislators are willing to seriously move out on doing, assist in, and have others to do what's necessary to correct this problem that we are facing around this. This comes from Brother Hollis. I work with most all of them coming up through the thickness of this discrimination. And I know they got the word to do what's needed to bring about this help. I still got faith in it. Because if I didn't have faith in them, Lord, it's
Yes, sir. Brother Thomas. Any other questions? All right, please, it's said two things in here already. On my email, so I'll check that. Have we gotten the list? Okay, so yes, sir.
It's still got that. And then I have one more I'm gonna send you for Senator Clark. It's Alice Clark.
Yeah.
I can get one from upstairs.
Do you have the new paradigm shift?
No, I know.
I had Ms. Trial go in, make sure.
That should be sent stuff to
It was an email.
Mrs. Strauss, yes.
Here you go, I got a copy, we got a copy. Where's the code?
It's.
It was a pack right there,
It's in here.
You want me to pull it?
Yes, it's copies. We can give them that one. Which one?
The Morgan slavery.
What's the slavery? Black, what is it?
David,
Oh, it's right here. It is.
Black. Oh, it's-
let me see what it. Yeah, David O'Shaughnessy.
And there's a piece in here, I wanted it to be read if we had had the time, but evidently we didn't. I wanted it to be read that, when Judge Keaton in '72, brought down his decision on the prison reform of apportionment reform after the lawsuit of Gates, was filed on them. The conditions that was going on during that time, I wanted it to be read because that was in 1971, 72. And when you read in that book, the conditions that was, inmates were facing then appears to be the same condition that we are seeing our people facing now, based on the visual contact that we got from filming from inside the prison. See, had it not been for those that sent that information to us, and we want to applaud them for them risking their being hurt for getting that information out to us. But because they showed us that, we was able to see that in 2020, that the same conditions that was faced in 1971-72 that caused them to change the federal courts to create a reform decision, it's the same condition. So nothing has changed.
Well, but it had been, I guess it was managed for a little while, right? I read the opinion, the Gates versus Collins.
Yes, ma'am.
And, you know, I think someone was in place to monitor prisons, they're no longer serving the name of So, I mean, did it help for a little while, or?
Well, I think it was more opposition to it than anything. One of the major pieces that they wanted to do when they're talking about a redistribution of some of the inmates there was to decentralize the prisons, which we see is happening now. But back then it was very, very opposite. Individuals didn't want those prisoners in their communities. So the condition remained the same. All they did was, just like the Board of Education decision, what they did to integrate, the same thing happened with the prison. There was no real big change. And that's why we're facing with what they just did whatever it needed to do, because another thing is that the Oversight Committee of 1972, if you think about it, was individuals that really were still racist. You know, Mississippi in 1972 was just as racist as it was in 1932. And those that was in control, and those that was in control in the House and the Senate. That's why we applaud y'all today, in the sense that we have somewhat of the numbers of representatives that we can come to and speak to in regards to issues that we pray. And that's why at my first presentation, when I first started, I talked about this word petition, which is an indelible right of individuals in this country. One of the most number one rights is to present a petition. And so for us to do that in the past, when we would come before the board didn't look like us, they were not concerned. Now we do.
Let me ask you a question. Where's the last state that has undergone prison reform?
Oklahoma. And so Oklahoma was number 2 in prison, in the number of, in the highest number of incarcerated. And now Mississippi is, because Oklahoma has decarcerated a couple of months ago. Like it was in the last, 2019, early 2020.
They just reformed?
Yeah.
How long will it take?
I mean, they're in the process, but like they're estimated to decrease their prison population by, I have a number, but that by thousands, like in the tens of thousands. So Mississippi will be the second number 2. And I can send you, that's gonna be a part of the list.
Okay.
Of but Oklahoma, and you can literally just Google it, and it'll like,
Even
That's
with,
the last stage of reform.
even with,
the latest, yeah, like the most recent.
and even with the reentry programs, we have been trying to work with the reentry programs. We've been trying to get qualified individuals, but even with, as far as going up to the governorship, is that we begin to realize that the governorship was granting certain grants to certain entities that did not have our people concerned. And so those that we had in place to qualify for those reentry programs, for those transitional centers, they were turned down. So we are left to do the same thing we were doing 100, 150 years ago. It was called double taxing. We've always been double taxed, so we are forced to go within our own pockets and try to develop these transition centers up on our own. When the money is there for us to help us in doing that.
I hate to run, but I feel like
No, ma'am, thank you.
And I'm gonna be nice.
Thank you.